Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. As always, I am Kaylee Batesman, the content director at She Can Code. And today we're discussing the importance of developing a company culture that attracts and retains talent. Now, a good company culture starts from the top and trickles down, but an inclusive workplace that values and celebrates diversity starts during the hiring process. To discuss the importance of building a positive workplace culture, I'm joined today by the wonderful Linda Lee, Chief People and Culture Officer at Velocity Global. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. We've got so much to talk about. This is going to be a really great topic to go into today. So to kick off, though, can we set the scene with a bit of background about yourself, how you got into tech, how you landed your role, and tell us all about you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I started with 8 years in the government of Canada, of all places, where I really thought I would die there because it's the golden handcuffs. It's a wonderful pension, stability, consistency. And then I got this wonderful opportunity to represent the Canadian government on broadband technology issues around APAC. And I got to be the Canadian representative. I just still boggles my mind that they gave me that opportunity. And through that opportunity, I met a ton of technology companies naturally, one of them being Qualcomm, based in San Diego, California. And they recruited me down, and that started my tech career. And I did it mostly in business development. After Qualcomm, I met an incredible leader named Frank Calderoni, who was the CFO of Cisco Systems. And he and I just connected on so many levels, and I became his chief of staff and kind of ran his cultural initiatives at Cisco when he had about 5,000 employees reporting to him. And next thing you know, let's fast forward almost 14 years, Kaylee, and I have been with him at Cisco, Red Hat, Anaplan, and Velocity Global. Wow. So I've had the same manager for 14 years. Can you imagine?
And a great sponsor for you, obviously.
I could talk forever about sponsorship because I realize how important he was as a sponsor. And I always had mentors who are still incredibly important to me, but absolutely he was the one who had my name ready to go in that important room when people are making decisions for the next promotion or next opportunity, or even just lateral moves, which he had me do. I didn't grow up in traditional HR. He had me in operations and in strategy and in communications and cultural initiatives, and people strategy was very important to him. But the last role I had with him at Anaplan, he put me in the chief people role. And I remember thinking to myself, is he crazy? Like, I am not someone who's traditionally grown up in HR, but he wanted to see how I would do understanding every aspect of the business. Yeah. And that had immensely helped me in that role. So when we came to Velocity Global, I said, I absolutely will take on HR. However, culture has to be a part of that remit. So that's how I all started with. It's incredible.
Amazing. And I hear it a lot. I hear ladies that fell into tech, which is nice to hear in itself, that people eventually make it into the industry. That's fine with us. Did you think that when you were younger, though, that you might fall into tech? What I can tell me your face, you probably didn't look to tech as a great career, or did you think it was boring? Or
No, I just didn't think it was. You know what I thought of it as? The lottery.
Yeah.
Only a select few get to have the experiences we do in tech. And I just didn't think I'd be one of those people who would win the lottery. And I remember when I joined Qualcomm, I was so grateful for the opportunity because I felt like I truly won a lottery. And so I would say that I never, ever thought I would make it into the tech world. In fact, my parents are still in shock, even though I've been in it for almost 20 plus years. They can't believe someone who had a liberal arts degree, who did a master's in intercultural communications, could possibly be where I am today. However, I will tell you, it just takes so much more, which we'll get into, the soft skills that are transferable, and the ability to, as women in particular, to make sure we present ourselves truly in the light that we are. A lot of us wait till we are absolutely overqualified or perfect in the roles to take it on. And yet all of our male counterparts surpass us very quickly because they're not waiting to be 100%. They're waiting at sometimes 20%, 40%. And we're trying to get to that level. So I would say, I mentor a lot of young ladies, and I always say to them, stop trying to overachieve. Stop telling yourself you're not good enough. What if you actually do well in this role where you are today? And that stops them in their tracks, because a lot of us just assume we're not quite ready.
Yeah,
and that's
especially
okay.
if you didn't take a STEM subject or
Yes.
computer science degree and you think, that's it, you know, I have absolutely no chance. Whereas yourself,
Right.
you took something quite creative, and a lot of people don't necessarily think that there's a crossover there, but actually they get in the industry and think, actually, it's really creative industry. And as you said, there are so many transferable skills that it's like, why is that the best hidden secret about tech?
Exactly. And I find, if I can say this, I actually look for working moms and parents. They're the hardest working people I know, partly because you are balancing and managing and yet getting everything done. Truly, you work full time, you've got full-time kids, you've got some, full-time spouse, partner, whomever is there, or may not, you may be single, and yet you're getting all of this done. And it's extraordinary to me, because you know how to prioritize, you know how to be creative, you're innovative, you know how to work within a community, you understand how to ask for help. All of those things is what we need in a workplace.
Yeah, and incredibly loyal.
Oh,
as well.
gosh.
Employees like
Yes.
that, they're not the people that, and we've all done it, you've all been, that younger graduate that comes in and thinks, I only need to spend a year, 2 years here and I can go. But actually, you're right, if you're a returner or a parent, or you've got some other commitment, the last thing you want to do is change jobs and find somebody that is, you have to fit in with how they work, and you kind of have to say, this is my routine, and they're just very loyal people that
I totally agree.
around.
Yes, absolutely.
So we've got so much to cover today. So I want to kick off with a little bit obviously about the company culture, as you've touched on a bit already. So why is it important for companies to hire, companies to be more intentional about who they hire? Because surely growth is more than just hiring people with great qualifications that we just touched on a little bit there.
Yeah, it's, so most of my interviews, for example, I've been in the role about a month. And I've probably done 50 interviews, because I am hiring for some key roles. And I'm not hiring based on skill set or expertise, because that's what got you in the door. That's not what's important to me. What's important to me is if you're a cultural addition. So I'm not suggesting a cultural fit. You hear that very often. And I actually think that's an outdated term. You need someone who will add to your culture, not someone who's going to be intentionally fitting into the way you do things. In fact, I want someone who's going to be creative, innovative, thoughtful, genuine, authentic in the way that they want to solve problems and continue to evolve the company. So you actually have to be very intentional with the way that you think about someone being an addition to your culture. And I think of an example in my own career. When you work with someone that doesn't work out, gosh, it's so difficult for you, either as the manager, the peer, the subordinate. When someone doesn't work on your team, it's like this disease that just spreads, right? Yeah. But imagine when you're that person that doesn't actually belong or feel safe, and I have been that person on teams.
Yeah, I've been that person.
I've been that person. And I remember the moment I was at, a very early on tech company. And I remember not knowing Haley, and they brought in a consultant for our small team, and the consultant started to really hone in on me. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, they hired a consultant for team building exercises because their issues are with me. And I remember feeling horrible. And I remember thinking, I have been trying to fit, I've been trying to fit into their square, and I'm a circle, and I quit. And it was one of the best things I ever did for myself. And I remembered also thinking, I never want anyone else to feel that way. And so if someone doesn't quite match, I'm going to give feedback. I'm going to give coaching. I'm going to try, so that someone doesn't walk into a situation like that and realize everyone is not happy with you. And so I think it does quite a disservice to the team, the company, and the growth and what you're trying to build as a culture. And so it is so important, because it deeply impacts people, all who are affected, when there isn't quite an addition to your team. And so I actually think it's more just on a human level. Besides, yes, we all know the studies. When you have high performing teams that really respect and trust one another and their psychological safety, nothing but growth comes. Nothing but positivity, productivity, efficiencies, effectiveness. All of those things happen naturally. But we also have to think about the human element and the human side of feeling like you belong. Gosh, that makes all the world of difference.
Yes, I love everything you just said, because we had a live webinar recently that Velocity Global was involved in, and it's exactly that. It was about imposter syndrome, and we've all had that feeling of feeling like we don't belong. But actually, there are those moments where you just think, it's not me thinking, oh, I just don't belong here. It's, you really don't belong there. You've been either hired into the wrong role, or it's just not for you, or you know, there. And it's that, as you said, that psychological safety of trying to feel like, how do I get out of here with my mental health intact and not completely ruining my confidence? Because we had a speaker on there, and she was saying, you know, when I've been in those positions, she said, every time I saw, you know, a Slack notification or a Teams notification go off, I'd think, oh, I don't want to talk to anyone, because she had the same feeling that you said, and you're starting to go down and down and down into this spiral where you're thinking, I'm just no good. You know, everybody's got a problem with me. I shouldn't be here. And you're right. It is a bit on both sides, as to, you know, you thought you were walking into something else, they thought they were hiring somebody else, and it's kind of like, at that point, as you said, you know, you made the right decision of thinking, I just need to go for my own sanity.
Yes. And it was the best decision, because you know what happened after that? I took 9 months off, and can you believe I trained for a triathlon?
Oh gosh.
Youth, what youth will do to you. But then I met Frank Calderoni, who changed my life. So it was the right thing for me to do at that time. And by the way, I'll just plug, Holly Kane was on that lovely webinar from Velocity Global. You should take a listen to that lovely imposter syndrome one. Yes.
So insightful. And I could have spoke so much longer on that. I wanted to go on. I let the ladies go, because it's just such an interesting topic. We've all had that feeling of imposter syndrome, and a lot of it stems into finding a company that is a good culture fit. I mean, I love the fact that you call that you know, an addition, and a cultural addition rather than a fit, because you are absolutely right. It's not just slotting into a team, it's, you know, how much further can you take it and grow. But yeah, when we've all had that feeling where you're on the wrong team, and you just think, what am I going to do? And then you kind of find your tribe. You kind of go into the next thing, you think, oh, this is my tribe. This is where I'm meant to be, you know. And it just, everything flows freely when you're at a company that makes you, you know, feel that way. But as you said, it is intentional, and companies, you know, good companies, they try hard to ensure that happens, because as you said, if you get somebody that's wrong and it starts to bleed into team members, that negativity bleeds in, and it's very difficult to keep everybody, you know, that kind of those little things will start to get in other team members' heads and think, well, maybe there is a problem, but there is.
Exactly. Well, and you know what happens is, and it's in every company, so it's not like anyone's unique or immune to this. You've got your high performers, right? They're functioning really well. They're doing a great job. So what do we do as natural leaders? We ignore them.
Yeah.
because we're focused on the resistors, the ones complaining loudly and often and being difficult. And so we spend all our time with the resistors, and that is a mistake. And what you have to do is show your love to your highest performing visionary leaders. And so that you ignore the complaining and you just manage that carefully, whether it's through coaching, whether it's through performance management, whether it's exiting the company, so that you show your highest performing people that we love and care for you because you are performing at the highest levels, which is what we expect. We'll take care of this behind us. And that's the kind of culture we have to show. Otherwise, what we tend to do is go so focused on the resistors that these people leave.
Yes.
The high performers leave because they're sick of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've got a really toxic situation that happens. And so I always recommend when you've got a situation, you've got a loud complainer and you've got someone who's just really working hard all the time, you focus your efforts on the person working hard, acknowledge them, recognize them, value them, listen to them, spend more time with them. I guarantee this loud complainer will get quieter and quieter as you start to manage that out, and your performers will perform even more than you expected.
Yes. Instead of, I suppose, some managers assume as well that if you've got quite a young workforce who haven't been, in lots of different companies yet, those that have done the rounds a little bit and are kind of been in some bad workforces and then think this one's really great, I'm not going to listen to anybody that's complaining about anything because I really like this one. But if you've got, young graduates who haven't been through that, they're going to take it in. They're going to start soaking up the negativity, and they're going to think, oh, that person's complaining about something, I must listen. Maybe there really is a problem that I didn't know about. So if you've got quite a young workforce, you just need to nip that in the bud as soon as possible.
Absolutely. And I would also say that, I have to say we have a young workforce. Gosh, they're savvy. They're way more savvy than I was back in the day. Yeah. And I will tell you, though, what I have found about them is, I think when I first started out, I wouldn't have said culture was my top 5 reason to join a company. It would have been money, title, maybe my manager, the company brand, all of those things that nowadays do not matter at all to me. But I find that it's changed generationally, that culture is one of their top 3. They've learned very quickly that a culture that's accepting, evolving, transparent is what's going to attract the smartest of those young generation. And I'm even finding, as the more experienced leaders who I'm trying to look for, I think their top 1, they'll say to me, is culture. And I'm talking all the way up to the chief levels. They're all asking, well, what's the culture like? Well, what culture are you trying to build? How do I fit into that? What do you expect from me? And so it's becoming, and a lot of top leaders want to talk to me specifically if they want to join the company about culture. Yeah. What are your initiatives? What are you driving? What are your metrics? How are you doing this? And so I find myself almost selling our culture, which I wasn't expecting. And yet it's become one of the top 3 reasons why people join a company now, in my opinion.
Definitely. I think the pandemic really changed things, but I think people were feeling that way before anyway. I think, as you said, it has become a generational thing now. People expect more from companies, quite rightly. Yes. And they ask different questions in the interview process. So
yes.
What about Velocity Global? What are Velocity doing to create a positive company culture that is more inclusive and diverse? Because you spoke a little bit there about what company culture is and how you actually describe it. I've heard it described on this podcast before as it's not just a Slack group, it's how you feel every day at work. It's not just setting up another employee group where we can meet and have a chat. It is actually how you feel every day that you come to work. And what are Velocity doing there to create a positive company culture?
Well, thankfully I joined already when there was a positive company culture. What I will say though is I want to evolve it and enhance it, because for me, every human, no matter what shape, size, gender, age, industry, we all want to belong. There has to be a sense of belonging. And I think that they have a couple employee resource groups, which I think are important to build communities, which I think is important to have safe spaces for specific groups. However, I actually think it's gone a little far, not at Velocity, but in general, my previous companies, where it's been very siloed groups, separated from the rest, when we actually have a lot more in common. And so I want to bring cross collaboration amongst all of the employee resource groups and the diversity affinity groups, so that we all actually foster a sense of belonging. A lot of times what happens when we think and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusive efforts, we have to have a victim and a villain. When I actually think we need to think through how we best break down systemic barriers that are causing us to feel that way. In order to do that, a cross-collaborative approach would be far more effective than one going after this, one after going after that. And so I hope to build a real important sense of belonging, and I'm going to create a belonging council. The other thing is I'm also doing just today is I've created a culture committee of high potential employees across all the functions, all different levels, all different tenures, shapes and sizes, who are going to come together and be my eyes and ears. You know, I'm at a certain level now that I will not know what really is the feeling of what's happening. The other thing is I'm going to build a dashboard of cultural metrics. I did this at the last company. And what that looks like is, what are your attrition rates? What are your exit interviews talking about? What's your hiring acceptance? What do your referrals look like? What does Glassdoor ratings look like? So taking all those metrics and actually articulating, your employee survey results, what culture looks like will be important, and where you need to make improvements. So I think you have to measure it. I think you have to actually articulate it and define what it is. And you need culture champions throughout. I might have the title of culture, but it's not a sole responsibility of me, right? It's everyone across the company who has to feel like they're adding to the culture. And so I'm going to be doing some very specific initiatives and projects around the world, because we're so diverse in 185 countries with lots of different cultures, that I want to make sure that if we're celebrating Diwali, the Festival of Lights, for those in India, that we're all celebrating that across the world and the globe for the reasons for it. So it's just really thinking through, how do we globally connect? How do we actually make systemic changes within the company that have people feel psychologically safe, that feel like they have a sense of belonging, that they also feel like they all have their own safe communities too, because that's going to be important. So we need a little bit of all of it, but I am shifting this from what I've done in the past, where I thought ERGs were all that made sense, but I actually think you have to take it one step further, and I'm going to try to do that at Velocity.
Yes, I love the fact that the way you describe it as well is, doesn't just happen. I think people think culture just magically happens, and that you don't have to have any intention behind it, but you have metrics, and you know exactly what you want to do to ensure that something goes in the right direction. Have you worked at companies where that just kind of, people just think, oh, we've got a great company culture, and then actually you would speak to employees or look at the reviews on Glassdoor, and you would think, oh, are you sure? Because nobody's actually checked, as you said, the feeling on the ground, and what people were saying when they exit.
Yes, I will openly say this because Frank wrote a book about it. So at Anaplan, when we first started there about 6-7 years ago, the first thing we noticed was how its nickname was Manaplan.
Oh, yeah.
It was an old boys club. Women didn't even physically have a seat at the table. Heck, they weren't even invited in the room. Mm. So as much as we walked in there and they said we have a decent culture, I think people were careful not to say a great culture, because they knew there were some issues. I mean, that was a big problem. What I appreciated about Frank when he became CEO is he didn't say or proclaim, I'm going to support women. Here's my LinkedIn post about how much I love women. He didn't do any of that. His first hire was me. His second hire was Marilyn Miller. His third thing was to bring Sue Bostrom on the board. He just did actions.
Yeah.
He didn't proclaim anything. He didn't have to say anything. We heard the feedback. We put it into action. And that's what I really appreciate about a strong leadership team is those who don't, words are important, but your actions are far more important to say what you actually are going to do. Yeah. He actually championed a women's interest network, WIN. We're here to win with women. And he championed it at first because we didn't have enough female executives at the time. And then throughout Anaplan, we did pay parity. We paid women appropriately. And it was just one of his key initiatives. Did he make it a big deal? Did he put a big, no, he just said, it's important, get it done. Women need to be paid as well as and as significant as men. I don't ever want to see this issue of a lack of equity in pay. So that's what we focus on is your leaders have to show in actions what they're doing for the culture rather than proclaiming it and talking about it and saying all the right things, because that's okay, but not good enough.
Yeah. And then, you know, not only does the company culture not grow into what you need it to be, it also, as you know, we said in the intro to this, it trickles down because yes. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the importance, how important it is for a leadership team in creating a positive company culture, because you know, if you see, you know, the boss is always late or they talk negatively about their team or, you know, if, for instance, you know, if they're saying, you know, you should set boundaries and go and pick up your children when you need to and do the school run, but they don't do it themselves, then it's kind of, it's not going to trickle down. The company culture is just, you know, going to become quite negative or just stay the same. Really, it really does need to come from the top, as you said, just actions, just seeing it.
Yes, let me be really clear on this one. Your leadership will make or break a culture.
Yeah,
hands down. You could have the strongest company cultural champions ground up, and they could be revered and influential and motivating and inspiring. It doesn't matter if you've got leadership that's not supportive, that's not exemplifying that, that's not encouraging it, acknowledging it, recognizing it, it will break your culture. You know, I have seen even, I call them microclimates. You know, you can have a strong CEO and strong leadership team, but if you've got a difficult manager on one team, they can break the culture in that team. Even if the company culture is fantastic, you can still see those one or two managers who are very difficult or hard on their teams. Mm-hmm. Gosh, you'll see everyone leave.
Yeah, right? Good talent just exits. Because they say, don't they, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. And most people don't think about it and think, actually, you know, it's time for me to leave this job. They tend to think, what is my day-to-day like? You know, is it going to get any better? And if that's a no, then yes, they leave the manager.
Yes, absolutely. And imagine if you had a poor manager or great manager. Let's do the opposite. You have a great manager, but a poor leadership team above that person will leave. Yeah. Right? There's no protection for that person to do what they need to do because the leadership team is maybe not focused on culture or only, you can focus on the bottom line. I think that's obviously very important, but I strongly know there's a correlation to a strong culture equals great profits.
Yes.
Simple equation.
Yeah, definitely. But so what if though you're at a point at a company, things are all going wrong? Is it too late for a company to turn things around? Is it just a case of getting rid of the leadership team, or is it, you know, a lot more than that? Is it just a case of hiring yourself and saying, bring in Linda, she's going to sort it out? I mean, you had the pleasure of having a positive culture already at Velocity, but you know, do you need somebody to come in and shake things up?
Well, it depends on where you are in the organization, right? So if I would say it's never too late, if you've got the commitment from a leadership team. And I'm talking your C-levels. If your C-levels or a C-level, if you're under a chief people officer, a chief technology officer, a chief engineering officer, a chief product officer, and they're very focused on building a strong, positive culture, then it can turn around. It doesn't have to be the CEO all the time, right? If you've got someone that's engaged and is willing to be authentic and genuine and transparent and build trust and understands what it means to have a sense of belonging, oh my gosh, stay with that. It will take time, but it will turn over completely. I will say that there was no sense of belonging at Anaplan when we first started. There was very much an old boys club. It was very siloed and difficult to work there. And I would say within about a year, it dramatically shifted and changed completely. So I have seen complete shifts in cultures. I have seen, in fact, people who've been at Anaplan 10 years plus almost forget about that time period because it's been such a great culture for such a long time that was built after that. So I've seen turnarounds, but it does take a commitment of a certain leader. You can start small. You can start with a team. We started with a little 5-person culture committee of little influential high potentials who helped spread the word, who helped to start make those little shifts. And we started to celebrate people. We started basic recognition programs. I mean, it doesn't actually take that much. And it was all, by the way, free. We just started, to say thank you more. Like it legit. Yeah. That's all it sometimes takes, right?
Yeah, just as you said, a thank you, just holding on to good stuff. And if there is something that is wrong or something that they have spoken up about, it's just listening. And as you said, putting changes into place. I think, when you're at the wrong company as well, when you start hearing, some managers just kind of think, well, somebody's complaining, we'll replace them, and that's just, sometimes it is, you have to replace that person. If the fit just isn't there, it's just not working for everybody. Absolutely. You should work on that. But I don't think it should always be that go-to. Oh, that's great. If they're complaining, just get them out. They're replaceable. It's absolutely fine, because it sets off this feeling amongst the team as well. As you the lovely phrase you used about psychologically feeling safe, and that kind of paranoia starts to seep into the team. Whereas good companies, they really do invest and try and, as you said, even just a thank you can really change your day.
It could also be, here's a story that I'll never forget. George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, and we had an office there. And we sent a note immediately to the Minneapolis employees because there was riots and a lot of negative, violent activities were occurring. So we wanted to make sure everyone was feeling safe. And then we met with our Black ERG, our Black employees. And I remember one very brave employee spoke up and said, I was highly offended that the leadership team wrote an email to all the employees in Minneapolis to see if they're safe, but none of you checked in with any of us Black employees. Gosh, what a moment.
Yeah.
And if there's anything I've learned in leadership, is to admit your mistakes.
Yeah.
We made a big mistake.
Yeah. Although you might not have done it on purpose, somebody pointed it out.
Our unconscious bias, though, right, naturally went to all employees, but who was hurting the most in that moment?
Yeah.
And we didn't go to them first. And I have since become very close to that employee, because I just thought how scared she must have been, but yet she felt enough psychological safety to admit that to us. But thankfully, we admitted we made a mistake. Yeah. And we said we were going to do things differently and refer to them more. And we did build such a strong relationship with that group. Did we get everything right after that? No. But I will say it was such a powerful lesson for me to always stop and pause and think, what's my unconscious bias in this moment? Mm-hmm. And how do I think differently? And I will say that even those types of conversations, or the way that you start to think, will shift your culture.
Yes, definitely.
So I share that as I'll never forget that moment. I'll never forget that moment in that meeting. By the way, I burst into tears because I'm an emotional person, and I was incredibly embarrassed that I did, but I was so overwhelmed with how proud I was of her to have faced us C-levels to say, you made a really big mistake and it hurt my feelings and it was not okay. So that's the kind of culture I want to continue to build, that employees even can come to us and say, you didn't do this right.
Yeah, this is what we should do next time. Yeah, at least you felt safe enough to voice her opinion in that situation. So you know, I'm assuming as well that she thought it's worth me saying this because I know you will listen.
Yeah.
She might have seen that in a previous, you know, something that had happened, and she thought, well, you know, at least if I do voice my opinion, I'm taking a risk, but it will be worth it because they'll make a change.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So anyway, that's how powerful a strong culture will have for your culture, your company, and how much it will shift and change the way leadership will guide a company.
Yes, definitely. We are almost out of time, and I've got one more question for you. I could talk about this all afternoon. We have one more question for you. Do you have any tips for others that are looking to foster a good and strong company culture?
Yes, there's so many. Well, look, the number one I say to people is, I know it's simple, and we've said it a couple of times, but recognize people. It can be quick, it can be simple, it can be easy, it can just be a thank you. But I always say be specific. Like, thank you, Keely, for being organized and thoughtful with your questions today. You know, other than just being thank you, right? Like it's important to be specific, but it's also be the example you want it in your culture, even if you're not a leader. It's just start to set the example of the way you want to see things done in your company. I also say, check your ego. Your ego is not your amigo. Check your ego, because you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. I remember once someone slacked me a message that wasn't for me, but about me.
Oh, yes, we'll make that mistake. It's got the name in it, so it goes to the wrong person. Yeah.
And it was not kind at all. So I wrote this person. And so what's my ego do? And it should, I think all of your listeners would agree. We could get upset and angry and tell all our friends, and can you believe this jerk? And how could they say these things? I didn't do any of that. I checked my ego. And I emailed this person with the message, the screenshot, and I said, can we have an honest conversation? I'd like to know what feedback you have for me in order for you to have said these things about me. I'm open to a conversation tomorrow. The person wrote back like terrified and embarrassed and said, we'll meet. And when we met, the first thing this person said was, I am in shock you didn't get upset. And I am in shock I had the ability to fire this person as well. And I should have been fired for this. I profusely apologized. And I said, enough about that, but you felt this way about me. And I'm asking for honest feedback because you can't go back. So let's just be direct with one another. And I want to know what I've done to have deserved that kind of calls. And we ended up having a fantastic conversation. And to this day, this person is one of the most loyal people on my team. So I always say, check your ego. Yeah. Even in those kinds of circumstances where I had the right, I could have fired that person. I could have reprimanded that person. I could have gone all out on that person, but I chose not to. And I chose to instead check my ego and think about giving this person the benefit of the doubt. And how do I resolve this in a more productive, mature way?
So you're a great employee. I mean, why would you want to go at them and think, oh, now they want to leave anyway? They might go on and tell other people, you know, what it was like. It's kind of, you really don't need all of that. If they're a great employee,
yes,
hold on to them. Let's just find out what made you feel that way.
I don't expect everyone to like me. Does that make sense? But I do expect everyone to respect me. So if I somehow disrespected you and you don't feel respect towards me, then I've got to work on something, right? What happened after that was this person told everyone, which I wasn't expecting. This is what she did. This is amazing. I had this like weird following of people who couldn't believe I didn't just fire this person. So it built this sense of trust, and I don't know, like it spread, and I didn't expect him to talk to people about that situation. So I always say, don't let drama take over. We tend to do that naturally as humans. We have egos, it makes sense, but it really, I always switch it to, what does great look like? How can I help? Those are the two key questions I always ask myself in those kinds of situations. And then I always think, communicate as much and as often and as direct as you possibly can, because people are smart and they appreciate being treated as professionals. So do it. Treat them as adults.
And we've all been in that. You say just communicate. We've all had one of those roles where I had this a lot when I was younger. I think almost managers are worried about offending people as well by giving feedback, or, you know, they're not transparent with you about what's going on. And you think, I felt myself, you know, a few times say, especially when I was younger, I'm a big girl. Tell me if there's something you need me to change. You know, there's something happening here. Please tell me and we can work on it. And you just need somebody to be clear and upfront with you, not rude. As you said, you know, we don't need people to be rude and we don't need arguments to break out, but just being, you know, open and honest is just so important, instead of that feeling of, well, what does everybody else think of me? You know, it all starts to set in.
I love that, because what we say when we give feedback, which is a gift, because someone's taken the time to do this when they could have kept it to themselves or told 6 people about you and don't actually tell you. We do all that. Don't make it a big deal. Do not say feedback for Kaylee. Like, you do not have to do it. You can do it in the moment. You can give feedback, and it can be positive and it can be negative. It can be like, Kaylee, you gave me the best questions. I loved this conversation. That's feedback. That's feedback, right? It's like, hey, Kaylee, by the way, you could have asked me this question. That's feedback, people. So it doesn't have to be this formal sit down. I got to walk you through A, B, and C. I give feedback often. I'll be like, hey, after that meeting, I'll be like, you spoke up and I loved it. I wished I saw more of it though. By the way, this question you asked was fantastic. Where did that come from? I wish you asked 6 more questions. So it's like, you can give feedback constantly and daily and in different formats, and it doesn't have to be this big, scary thing. So always remember that feedback is a gift that you're giving to someone, because they may never have heard it before.
Yes.
And so it's so important to say, you're on the right track. This is slightly off track. Here's how I'll help you. What does great look like to you? How did you think that went? What could you have done differently? These are questions that guide you through feedback. But again, it doesn't have to be this big, scary conversation about it. It can be daily and regular and consistent, which is what I started to do with my team here at Velocity. I bet you half of them don't even know I'm giving them feedback almost every day.
Yeah, it becomes natural. And as well, you can tell those teams or those companies where, you know, people not only say great things, but actually in just what you see people, how they go in and out of that company. I worked at a fabulous American company, and a lot of people would leave because they'd want to try something else. They'd move on to somewhere else, but they'd come back. It was always that feeling of, but I could always come back. I know what the culture's like. It's a great culture. It feels like a family. I've left for a new opportunity, but I could come back with, and that really says a lot about a company, rather than people just thinking, I fled, I got out, I'm leaving a negative review, and that's it. You know. But
yes. And here's my last, oh my God, here's my last point about tip on this. Don't wait for the feedback. Ask. You can ask. I do it all the time with certain leaders. I'll ask, so what feedback do you have for me? How, because I've only been here 5 weeks, right? What have I not been focused on? What would you like me to focus on? So I ask the question so people don't go, oh, Linda's asked for feedback. I don't know what to do. Ask follow-up questions. What you're actually looking for. How am I resonating with your team? How can I help your team be more successful? What more could I be doing to ensure HR is your business partner? I'm asking these questions constantly in the last 5 weeks. So I don't wait for feedback. I ask for it. And I've gotten some brilliant suggestions and insights that I had never thought about. And so I think it's really important that you, and I love what you just said, boomerangs happen all the time. And what I love is when people feel safe enough to say, hey, Linda, I'm looking for my next role and it might not be at Velocity. Let's team together and work on a transition. I'd be happy to be a reference and a referral rather than the secretive, like, I'm going to do this, and I can't tell anyone. And then I'm just going to give I wish that culture could change. And I did that a little bit at my last few companies where I built relationships with my leaders so that they felt comfortable having those open conversations about their career.
Yeah, I love that, because as you said, even if it's not at your current company, it's just ensuring that the best for that person, for their career, where they're going next. It's so important to ensure that employee feels comfortable and can say I need to move forward in my career, whether or not it's at that company or the next one. It just makes everybody feel so much more psychologically safe, which is a phrase that you've used throughout this, and something that I'd never thought of actually in company culture. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So, Linda, I could talk about this all afternoon, but we are already out of time, I'm afraid. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on here and to chat about something so important. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. I hope everyone else enjoys it as well.
Yes, they definitely will. Thank you so much. And to everybody listening, as always, thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you again next time.